before I forget. All right, so here we go. And again, we're addressing bias in three areas: ageism, gender, and racial bias. And so we're going to start with ageism because that's probably the one that's most prominent to most of our boot camp community. And it's the one that, in my opinion, it's a much easier one to address. And before you think about shooting arrows, it's really the one that I think that there's so many counters to that make sense. And so I'm going to start with Stan Dennison. Hi, Stan. How you doing?
Good morning. Hi, I'm fine. Thank you.
All right. So Stan, before we really dive into this, tell us the typical demographic of people who are subjected to ageism.
Great place to start. Good morning, everyone, and good late morning to you East Coasters. Greetings from the beautiful San Francisco Bay Area, where I am remotely based. So what is the typical demographic that may be subjected to ageism in hiring and job search? First of all, no surprise, there are more women than men. No big surprise there. 76% of the women over the age of 45 reported that their age puts them certainly at a disadvantage when looking for work, compared to 65% for older men. What's the age range? Really, 2 out of 3 people have reported that between the age of 45 and 74 have reported some kind of or experienced some kind of ageism in job search. What's interesting, and I don't think we have many young folks in this category, 18 to 34 on this call, but what's interesting is the younger job searchers, that's 18 to 34, are actually more likely than the older job searchers, 55 and up, to actually experience some ageism in the job search. So it affects the younger people even more. Would not have guessed that.
Mm-mm. And the interesting thing is someone put a question in the chat: how do you determine ageism? And it's really, and that's a great question. It's when there's a couple of things. So from a hiring manager perspective, some of the things that we hear is, this is a candidate that's likely sunsetting. We don't see that they're going to be here for a number of years, or in the 30-something hiring manager's mind, it's like the older individual over 45, as Stan mentioned, is maybe won't fit into this culture, or doesn't have the energy or the technology prowess that we're looking for. And that's really, so a lot of what we're hearing from boot campers and from candidates is that, because of my age, I'm not getting opportunities. Now, it's a sweeping statement, but we hear that more times than we don't. And so you mentioned the younger ones, and so what are some things that younger people can do, or how do they experience ageism?
In general, or the younger people?
The younger people.
Well, there are many common misconceptions to the job search, both for the younger and the older people. Digital or computer literacy concerns come into play.
But that's more for the older.
It is.
Crowd.
Yeah. Most of my research was on the older job searcher.
Well, we know on the younger side, it's, a lot of times it's like, they may not have the maturity for a position. And we know that to be true. Nita, can you offer anything else on that?
I think it's really, shocking to hear, and it's probably a little bit funny if you think about it. If you're in the age range that's, I guess what you would call sunsetting, or maybe even feeling like you're considering ageism, the mindset that, wow, that there's a younger generation that might be feeling it as well. So it's not just that generation that's feeling it, but then also on the other end. So either I don't have enough experience or I have too much experience. So it's kind of ridiculous. So I think the mindset is just be confident in your experience, be confident in your abilities, be vocal about what you can do and how you can alleviate problems within an organization based on your relevant experience.
And so let's lay some groundwork here. What are some common misconceptions that hiring managers may have about the job seeker? We mentioned digital computer literacy. What
Yeah.
else?
Yeah, there's several, a great question. Another would be, how adaptable are they? Are they going to be able to adapt to the culture of the company, the ways that things are done? How set are they in their ways? Another might be, and this is common, higher salary expectations. The reality actually that we see is salary expectations many times will come into play, meaning, that candidates aren't necessarily declined based on their age, but more on the years of experience requiring higher pay. This is, of course, very short-sighted on the part of the hiring manager or the employer, but we here at PRG receive this feedback very often. So
Right.
that's certainly.
And then the other one that we've heard a lot is, people at maybe a VP or a C-level individual has decided, well, I still want to continue working and I'm going to accept a position at a lower level, and I'm still not being considered. Cindy, what are your thoughts on how to address that?
Well, and I think what happens is they think the higher level that we get, we're less hands-on, right? We're at that strategic level. We haven't gotten down in the weeds in a long time. So I think you have to position yourself that you've been down in the weeds, that you were maybe in IT, let's say you weren't coding, but you were leading that team and you understand it. So many skills are transferable. So I look out there at you, Dawn, sorry, but you became a project manager. You were a high-level executive and you very effectively marketed yourself in a different way. And I think that's what has to happen. You have to take off the baggage on your resume and drill down to, this is how I add value. Yes, I have umpteen years of experience to give you, but I can do the day-to-day, but you have to show you can do it.
I think Dawn is probably, and Stan talked to Dawn as well. I think Dawn is probably the best example that I've seen of somebody that has effectively said, hey, I'm interested in adding value, and I don't have to be at that senior level. And so Dawn, I'm just going to throw this out here. How did you effectively do that? I mean, from a mindset perspective, because so many people, they say they can take the step back, but when it comes down to it, and I've seen this firsthand with people, is that when they don't have a seat at the table, then that's when they start questioning the decisions and start, feeling like they could be doing more.
Thanks. I think from early on, I was always looking to add value and not so much as to enhance my level, my career level. So I did well in many businesses as an employee. And a lot of, even as a manager and VP and so forth of in regular employment, a lot of things were project oriented. So I remember, so moving into project management, and in particular as a consultant, it was an easy step. And I had plenty of stories to tell, and I had plenty of references that said, yeah, what he says he does. So I think as a consultant, ageism was, or my age and / experience was more advantageous as opposed to a bias.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And what I heard most prominently was your mindset. And that's where I think, and that's really the common theme that I think we'll hear throughout is it is about mindset. So Stan, what are some job search best practices for people who are, feeling like ageism might be an issue? And not everyone does.
Great question again. Thank you. First of all, definitely research the company you're considering. Look at the website, look at the homepage. A lot of them have photographs of the group. Are there older people there? Are there younger people there? What does it look like? Is it a really young group? You can tell a lot just by looking at the website. Consider networking. And this came, I do want to thank Bill Miner and Don Badorf, both boot camp alum with whom I spoke last week, gave me a lot of great ideas. This came, I think, from Don. Network into the company, or maybe it was from Bill. Network into the company. It's much more effective and much less work than just purely applying online. There are ways to get in and network and find a way through that door. Be open to consulting. Don Badorf just mentioned that. He said, and I'll repeat, that older job searchers are definitely at an advantage, not a disadvantage, when it comes to being a consultant at a company, at least initially. They bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to share. Those are the two that really stood out.
I like the idea of looking at the company website and seeing, the players, many companies, many startup tech companies will put the entire team on, and but larger companies, they'll have the leadership team. And I think, being able to tell kind of the makeup of the executive team is one way, but also searching in LinkedIn and find out, who their employees are. So Bill Miner, I know that you talked to Stan, and you had an interesting experience. You, from what I understand, you faced a lot of shut doors, and then you found a really great way to get a door open. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes, ma'am. Excuse me. No, I lost my job with Ventura Foods in 2013 when they had a change in CEO, and he basically brought his own people with him. So I was 61 years old with a younger child. I was energetic. I wanted to work. And for about 12 months, I banged my head against the wall of ATS and lower level HR. Then I saw a company, CHS, had an opening for global operations director. I knew people at CHS. In fact, I had shared a taxi with one of them from San Bernardino down to San Diego Airport one time. So I wrote this guy who was an EVP at that point in time.
Oh, wow.
I didn't get a reply from him, but he hand walked my resume down to a SVP and said, "This is the guy you need to solve some problems for you. Don't pay attention that he's 61 years old. If he stays 10 years or he stays 5 years, he'll leave a better place than he found." So within a week, I was in Minneapolis interviewing, and 2 weeks later, I started to work. So for me, it was all about getting beyond the ATS, getting beyond the lower level HR, even getting beyond the middle level managers and going straight to somebody who knew me and knew what I could do.
That I really like your story, Bill, and it's great to see you again, by the way. But
Good to see you.
it's I feel like it's really reflective of a best practice. And Allie asked a question, so yes, Jeff, I'll address it. How do you overcome the notion that you have too much experience that could be a threat to the hiring manager? Bill, I'm going to pose that to you. Did you ever experience that at all?
No, I never felt that people thought I had too much experience. I think it was more the runway situation. This guy can retire in 4 years. It's going to cost us a lot of money to hire him. It's going to cost us a lot of money to move him, particularly out of California into a Midwestern state. It was more of, let's get by the ATS. Let's get by the lower level HR and find somebody in the organization that you know and knows you. Maybe it's just somebody to make an introduction, but I think that once I learned how to do that, the first 12 months, my job search, I banged my head on the wall. The last 2 months, I had 2 active offers on the table at all times.
Wow.
And it's
Wow, that's really impressive. You're the story that whenever one, mentions, anytime I get a call and someone mentions that they're experiencing ageism bias, and I share your story. I didn't share the networking part because I didn't know how you got in, but what I said is, this is a man who is in his 60s and came into my office and said, I'm going to work. I have a young child and I'm going to work. And doggone it, you did.
just a matter of banging on enough doors. Now, at one point in time, I was the SVP with Ventura Foods. The highest title I got with CHS was Global Director of Operations and Engineering. No VP title there, but the pay was equal and the benefits were better.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Now, Cindy, to answer Ali's question, how do you overcome the thought that you have too much experience and could be a threat? How would you respond to that?
So I think if you're looking at that, Ali, from the perspective of, does my resume show too much? I think you just need to show your value to the job you're seeking. What are they asking for? And the top third of the landscape of your resume has to address what that is, right? Play that out, and the other can be downplayed. I think if you have older skills, older technology, drop it off. Doesn't make any difference what we did back in God knows when, because everything's changed. You need to show what your current, what are the current skills that are out there from a technology perspective or best practice perspective. So long story short, I think you can show too much because it's outdated.
But what about the idea of the threat?
Of the threat? Oh, the threat that you know more
Does the
than me?
hiring manager truly? I mean, we talk to hiring managers all the time.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I have not once heard a hiring manager say that this person I feel has too much experience.
No.
Yeah.
I don't honestly see that. Now, are you going to come up occasionally with a hiring manager that is challenged by you and feels threatened by you? Oh, absolutely. And quite honestly, you don't want to work for them in the first place, right? It's going to be a constant battle. You want a hiring manager that values you and what you bring to the table. So that's what you just have to focus on. It's all about your value, how you make them look better. That's what the interview is all about.
Yeah. And sometimes what we've heard is hiring managers will say they won't be happy in this position for very long. So it's not that they perceive a threat, they perceive that you're a flight risk. And that's the biggest concern that HR leaders have shared with us and hiring managers have shared with us, is that you are a flight risk as a senior level person that may not be interviewing for a position that is as senior as they're used to. That's probably the most common. Ali, I hope that's addressed it for you.
Yeah, kind of. It's kind of strange because sometimes when you go through the interview process and when they ask a question about, for example, how do you overcome a challenge? And you come up with, 2-3 options, which you can see that they're surprised to hear those solutions by you. And you kind of can tell that they even think about it, or they ask you a situation, for example, that they come up with and they still don't know how to go about doing it, and you come up with options for them right away in the interview process. You can see they kind of hold back, and they become a lot more, how should I say, more concerned about how they go forward with your application. And the same thing when you go through, for example, the team members, same thing. They ask you to do it, for example, a presentation on a solution that they're thinking about, and you give the presentation, and you go through the whole hour of giving them the overall strategy, approach, and implementation of the solution, and then you don't hear back at all. They just take the presentation and go away.
Well, and that may happen, and that's a risk, but I would say you're better off sharing your technology expertise and your problem solving abilities. And sometimes, it's a matter of just not the right chemistry with a candidate. And so, Ellie, and I happen to know more of your background, and I think you're a rock star. And what I would say is maybe you're not aiming high enough. And because, I think you are such an experienced talent, and you do add value. And Jackie, yes, the average stay is 3 years. I'd even say it's lower now, but hiring managers still think about that. And it absolutely is a fact. In the hiring company's mind, you're an investment. Now, in the job seeker's mind, and what happens, in reality, is that it is going to be a shorter duration, but the company wants, a person for the long haul. And so, Stan, let's talk about how to show up for the interview, because this is where we've heard, hands down, the most input from clients is how to show up for an interview. Why don't you share with us?
Yeah. Some of this is common sense, but some maybe not. First of all, be super energetic. Be yourself, but be energetic. Emphasize your excitement for the role instead of your wealth of knowledge. Really focus on your excitement for the role. Storytell. At boot camp, we always talk about storytelling during the interview process.
And Dawn mentioned that.
Share not what you did, but how you did it as well. And a particular story that really will help them to get to know you and not just your achievements. It's not really just what you did, but how you did it, with some actual related stories. That's a storytelling part. And those stories should also speak, by the way, to your technology prowess, because we all have it, right? Show genuine interest in the interviewer. It really still gets down to human contact. It's one human being talking to another, and just, connect the best that you can during that process. Last but not least, be comfortable, use confident, calm body language throughout your interview. Really focus on eye contact. And by the way, you don't really have to dress in a way that don't dress in a way that you feel will make you fit in. Be yourself, be professional, but be confident and be genuine.
I like those, especially the energetic one. And what we also know is that whatever negative thoughts we're harboring show up no matter what in an interview. We think that we're good at hiding it, but it just doesn't. And so we're going to move now to talk about gender bias. And Cindy has, number one, the clients that she talks to all the time, but also she spoke with a neuroscientist, and I thought this was interesting. So Cindy, why don't you share?
Well, gender bias, we all know, right? I could have looked and researched for days, hours, months. There is so much written, and primarily on how women are maligned, right? I mean, for every 100 men promoted to a manager, only 85 women are. Women still only make up a little over 47% of the workforce. It goes on and on. But the bias is on both sides. And it comes down to unconscious bias. It comes down to the neuroscience. We are hardwired in our head for certain biases. So
that's what's surprising.
Yes.
So what does a job seeker do?
What does a job seeker do? I think you have to be conscious of it. And I think you have to be conscious of who your audience is. You have to listen to your audience and then you have to express who you are. But in your mindset, the only thing we can really do with unconscious bias is have an understanding of it. So one of the best tests you can actually take is the Harvard IAT, what is it? I always say it wrong, implicit association test. So even people I read about that had written books on bias took this test and realized they had these unconscious biases that were playing out in their decision-making process. So it's just all about being aware. I look at somebody and I make an unconscious bias opinion of that person in my first 5 seconds. But it is the good interviewer and you being the good individual to see beyond that, right? We have to look at people, be conscious of how we make assumptions about people. I mean, a prime example, and this is just off the wall. I was coming out of a shopping mall and I had way too many packages to get to my car, and I probably looked like I was never going to make it to my trunk. And a car pulls up and a guy gets out, and I mean, he is tattooed from his forehead to whatever I could see. And I'm like, oh my God, they're going to rob me. And he's like, no, let me help you. I'm like, well, one, I thought, do I look that old? Jesus, I can't get to my car. But on the other hand, it was an act of kindness on his part, but I immediately made a negative assumption about him based on how he looked. And we do that. So you've got to become aware. And yes, we all hope that the person interviewing us has no bias. We hope the companies are doing programs, which they are. I've talked to one of our clients, put me in touch with a company that they are working with to make hiring managers aware of what their unconscious bias is. So I think it's the neuroscience. Read up on it. Read up who you are. You are biased in some way, shape, or form.
Well, and what comes to mind, Cindy, is as a job seeker, we go in with our biases.
Yeah.
And as a hiring manager, there's biases. And by the way, the link that Cindy mentioned, the Harvard IAT assessment, we'll send the link out with the recording, and so you all have it. And I really hope that, you know, we all take it and start becoming more aware. Okay, let's talk about some of the statistical examples of gender bias. Well,
so gender bias, it leans to more men will be hired. It's just the way it is. More men get promoted. It's just the way it is. It is getting
but what
better.
About like the physical attributes of men?
So the attributes of men come across as they're strategic, they're direct, they're concise, they can execute very quickly. Women come across as nurturing, compassionate, not being able to make a decision as quickly as a man, maybe not being able to deliver the difficult message, all preconceived ideas.
Yeah, and there was actually a statistic about tall men.
Yeah, so there's beauty bias, right? Tall men don't get hired as often as shorter, right? There's why there is that statistic out there, I really could never find the answer to, but it was perceived that tall men are a threat.
Or too dominant, wow.
Too dominant.
And then what about weight?
Oh, weight is a huge factor on both sides. Well, it leans towards heavy-set men will be hired over heavy-set women, which is just wrong. But anyway, but it is a preconceived notion that is out there, and they've statistically shown that happens. Childbearing years, although those lines are becoming blurred, women were interviewed, received less job opportunities when they're within childbearing years. Although that becomes a little different now that there is parental leave on both sides, right? There's also a preconception based, because women are so nurturing, that you have aging parents that you take care of. You won't be focused on the job. So all of these play against us. But then you can read statistics to the opposite. So where they tell us to make generic resumes so that we're not so male or female. Oh, well, we look more male oriented, right? We use stronger words, things like that. Then I read an article even last night that said women that did that received less opportunities because they were considered pushy, overbearing.
Yeah.
They wanted them to appear more nurturing. So at the end of the day, you're conflicted, right? What do I do and what do I not do? But
that's so true. May I for a minute, Cheryl? In the space of DEI, the unconscious bias is something that we work on with a lot of clients, because we all have unconscious biases. But women, if we behave, Cindy, the way you identified men behaving, you know, confident, strong, bold, direct, we are stigmatized with the
and
of assertive, aggressive.
yeah, you're
Absolutely.
absolutely right.
Everything negative, not positive.
Well, and so what we want to talk about are some ways to get past the bias. And so Cindy, why don't you share some of those?
So in your initial presentation of your resume, to get past bias, it does help. Overall, the statistics show if you use stronger adjectives to describe yourself, even though I just gave an example of looking nurturing, they do like stronger adjectives. You can change your name. There was a great example of a woman, I think her name was Jessica, her name's Jessica, I think it was Norwell. She was a journalist. She was hawking her an article, and for months, it sent it out with not one response. So she changed her email address and her name to JD Howell. Within 1 hour, that article, same article, was picked up.
That's a really extreme example, but we
Yes.
we know a lot of people who are using initials, women who are using initials instead of their full name. And unfortunately, based on that neuroscientist that you spoke to, it seems to be effective, at least in getting your resume looked at, right?
It does get your resume looked at. I mean, they're going so far now as to say, which I find amusing, take your picture down off of LinkedIn, become more generic.
Yeah, and that's extreme in my mind. And I hear that as, you know, suggestions. I just don't know that I agree with that. Now let's talk about the use of pronouns. So, you know, people are using their pronouns more on LinkedIn and their resume even. We're seeing that more and more. And he, you know, he, him, she, her, and they, them. And that's a newer thing that we're seeing. And there's challenges with that. Tina, why don't you share with us a little bit about how people, you know, may work around that or what they have to deal with?
Sure. It's really hard to decide to put your pronouns out there to, like we're just talking about women changing their names. I mean, can you imagine how bold you would be to not only show, you know, who you are, but also what you are identifying as in your gender. So putting your pronouns on your LinkedIn profile, on your resume, is something that's very new that we're seeing, that is very, I think we're going to see a lot more of it. But I think a good way for someone who is gender nonconforming or non-binary to look at a company's website, like Stan said earlier, or on their LinkedIn profiles, see if they're talking about inclusion, see if their employees are using their pronouns. And if they are, then it's probably a pretty good sign that this is a company who values inclusion and actually embodies it on a daily basis.
That's great input. And then I think the biggest challenge that we're hearing is when a job seeker is interviewing with somebody with a non-conforming, non-binary pronoun.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think being aware that we are no longer in a male-female world, and being comfortable to ask an interviewer what their pronouns are, but only if you're ready to use them. And if you incorrectly state them, just apologize and then use them correctly. And if you're if you are the interviewee and you are gender nonconforming or non-binary and you have pronouns and they're misstated in your interview, just correct them. And actually I prefer they them pronouns, and then bring the conversation back to what you bring to the table. It can just be very simple.
And Darcy mentioned, I don't know, Darcy, that it annoys people that you use your pronouns on Zoom, but I appreciate the fact that at Berkeley, the students, it helps them to feel more comfortable. Where are you, Darcy? And so you're working with students at Berkeley, which is our, the future of our candidates in jobs and our leaders. So talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing with pronouns.
Yeah, so I actually have people say to me, you don't need to have that on there. That's really obvious. We know that you are a woman, but I also have some clients that they, as a company, put it on there. But at Berkeley, we always use our pronouns because some students don't feel comfortable saying what they want their pronouns to be. And it's not just they, them. We have people who present as a woman and it'll say he, his. Present as a man, like you might be looking at them and you're like, I'm sure that, well, you may be sure, but let's be respectful. And I will say that if we talk about ageism, this is one of those things. If you're interviewing on Zoom with really young folks, like especially like Gen Z, they really are expecting that if we think about not being able to adapt, this is one of those things we need to adapt to. And yes, if you make a mistake, correct it yourself, but don't continue to make that mistake. I will say that because I also work with professors where we're in a big group and I'm like privately IMing them like, it's right there on the Zoom. Stop making that mistake. You're embarrassing like the faculty here. So yeah, I think these are the types of things that also allow people to express themselves, but also show that we are paying attention.
Yeah, thank you for that, Darcy, because I think, as a professor at Berkeley, you're seeing firsthand what the, up and coming generation will, be, how they will be influencing things. And I do think that the use of pronouns is going to become much more prominent and pervasive. So let's also talk about racial bias. And Nita, I'm really gonna focus on your experience. So tell us a little bit about racial bias and really, is it still happening? And what are some ways to just be aware of it, and what are some ways to handle it?
Dum dum dum. That's a scary question, right?
Okay, honey.
Yes, racial bias in today, 2022, actually 2022, still does exist. It's very, very, very present. And what we've noticed is amongst job seekers and job goers, resume bias, especially against names, are the number one ways in which individuals are seeing that they are being targeted or excluded from certain opportunities that they find themselves to be qualified for as far as their experience is concerned.
So what are some ways that people counter it, and right, wrong, or whatever, right?
Right. So if you are African, Middle Eastern, Asian, Pacific Islander, or an American with a very cool sounding name, a lot of individuals are known to do something that they call whitening. And the very disheartening factor is that there was a study done at MIT just in 2020, where a professor actually changed all of the names that were what he called typical Black sounding names, to whitening those names. And individuals with the exact same breadth of experience received 50% more callbacks and more interviews than those with typical Anglo-Saxon names. So a lot of people are changing their names. I know one of my friends named Lovejoy goes by Joy. I've even been asked if I have whitened my name. My given name is Juanita. I am born to a Salvadorian father and an African-American mother. And my name is a hybrid of both my grandfather Quincy and my grandmother Juanita. So with my name, I go by Nita because I was a female junior, and that's what my family called me. But my peers have asked me numerous times, do you go by Nita so that your name sounds, whiter, or that it's more Anglo-Saxon or more acceptable for individuals to be able to pronounce? And I had to do some soul searching and say, absolutely not. That had nothing to do with it. But thank you for bringing that to my attention. And that's something that I want to dive into. So, there are definite bias against, names, and people are being excluded based on what they're seeing, and ways to counter it. Oh,
And you also mentioned education.
Oh, yes. Education. People who come from historical Black colleges and universities, I've seen them actually take their HBCUs off of their resumes and actually just put what their degree is in, and the time in which they actually received it, to see if they could actually get responses back from hiring managers.
And what about other countries?
So that is actually another bias that I was able to tap into, which I guess I was a little bit unaware of it, but it's out of country experience bias. So people whose breadth of experience are sometimes in their mother country are being seen as individuals who in America can't handle the positions internally that they have, based on software, based on policy and procedure and human resources. There are several different things that people have experienced, and there are laws protecting Americans against this, and yet it still happens every day.
Yeah, it's interesting, but you have a strong opinion of what people should do. Why don't you share that?
I sincerely feel like everyone, and I know PRG stands behind me, be unapologetically your authentic self. So whatever it is that you come from, whatever your surname or your given name, or whatever it is that you are, stand firm in your background, stand firm in your authenticity, and stand firm in who you are and what you bring to the table. And at the end of the day, if the company is not interested in you or your experience or what you have, do you really want to work for them anyway?
Right. And that's generally the suggestion that we have is it a right fit? Anne Marie asks, what about the combination of gender and age? Cindy.
I'm going to double whammy, right?
And the reason that I do is because, you're the one that are, between you and I, we're talking to more boot campers, we're talking to more candidates and clients. And, these are discussions that I have with clients all the time.
You do. And yes, there's bias. I go back to, and I would reiterate what Nita has said so eloquently. You have to be who you are, and you don't want to be or work for a company that doesn't accept you for what you are. Yes, there is value in presenting yourself in a way that perhaps does not parlay that from a written perspective of a resume, if that helps get you in the door. But you show up for that interview, and you need to be your authentic self when you get there. I mean, we can't overcome what that bias is, but we can do, as we've all reflected on, do your research of that company. Look at that company and try to get who that company honestly is. They all have fancy mission statements, but do they live up to that mission statement?
Oh yeah, that's always a question.
And it was interesting. I read an article that millennials are the group that are calling the companies out. They went to work for companies with great mission statements. And when they got on board, they realized there is no practice of that within that company.
That's fascinating.
And we can't know all of that before we go in. We have to try and evaluate the person that is interviewing us and bring our value to them, and they have to share with you their value, right?
Yeah.
You have to come to a common ground of who they are. You want to work for somebody that you are like-minded with, that you can learn from, that will appreciate who you are.
And I like what Carlene Joseph put in the chat. You have to work for and with people who see you and want you. And you're absolutely right. Jill, I'm going to put you on the spot. I know you're an HR consultant, and what thoughts do you have for people feeling like they're facing bias?
You know, I do say it exists. I don't sugarcoat it by any stretch of the imagination. But when I work with clients, when we ask questions in the interview, we screen those, we scrutinize those questions to make sure that we're getting to the reason why we want to hire them, right? So we're really focused on the job. We do ask certain questions that will lead to understanding what motivates them. So we're very careful about the questions that we ask to kind of glean the information that we're trying to ascertain.
And what do you think about the way our brains are wired for bias?
It's absolutely true. I mean, everyone's biased. I mean, people can say, they're, they don't see color, but they do. I don't care what anybody says. You do see it. You do see the age. You do see the weight. You do see nationality. You hear accents. It's out there, and I'm not going to deny it. And it's the best that you can do. Like, I've gone through several microaggression trainings, and as long as you listen and understand what those are and accept them, and again, like Darcy said, apologize if you make a mistake, but move on and don't make it again. I even had someone who I didn't know what their pronouns were. I had never met them. And I said she, and they took offense to that because they went by they, but I didn't know that. But as soon as I found out, I apologized. But sometimes you're not going to know. Sometimes you're not going to know, but you just have to, as soon as you do know, you correct it and move on.
Thank you, Jill. Chris, you have a question.
No, I just had a fun fact that I wanted to reiterate, was that
Please.
Google earlier in their tenure as an organization, they did some studies on who were our most effective work teams. And they did a study they took type A work teams, which were all primarily dominant type A males, some females, and then they took diverse teams that had introverts, extroverts, all different ages and ethnicities. And the hybrid diverse teams on a consistent basis outperformed the type A team. So I think that's an interesting thing just to keep in your mind as you go through this kind of stuff, that actually diversity in almost any form can outperform like a mono type of a culture where everybody's identically the same. But in some businesses, that's not the case. Like in some financial companies I work with, everybody was a type A kind of a person and they are expected to be that way. And those businesses thrive just fine. But that's an interesting study to read if you want to get some background on that. The Google Diverse Team Performance Study. I don't have the link.
Okay, well, thank
Christy-
you for that, Chris. Hey, Cheryl, you said that there's a question.
You're on mute.
There we go. Yeah, Ron Paul had a question, but he's left. But his question is good. It says, "What are some of the signs that can indicate you're being subject to ageism?" So kind of back to the ageism question.
So Cindy, I'm going to hand that over to you.
I would say I'm assuming he means that he's already in a company, and
No, he was wondering, I think, how would he know if he's being,
Yeah.
if he's
okay.
being subjected to ageism?
So it's hard to know. You have to listen to the person, right, interviewing you and the questions that they're posing you. I think you can tell by the questions that they ask you that they're not diving deep into what you bring to the table. They have a preconceived notion already that you're not the candidate they want. So they're just asking you fluffy questions. They're not really saying, what was that last project you worked on? I want to understand what that ROI is. They're not incorporating you into their organization in their mind.
Yeah, I think it's hard, right? It's really hard to understand if you are. And I would go so far as to say, you know what, go in with the idea that it's not about ageism, but just be aware that ageism exists.
Yes.
Carol, you have a question.
No, I think, thank you. Thank you again for another great session. But I just wanted to say, I think the categories that we spoke about, all three, I think everyone has preconceived notions, but I think if you be the best that you can possibly be and just worry about and stay focused on what you want from this particular session, whether you're interviewing, you want to be, again, it's back to that mindset. If you have that positive mindset, it doesn't matter about ageism. It won't matter about your race. It won't matter. I mean, that's what diversity, equity is all about nowadays. So it's going to be there. It's been there before we were all here.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Don, you have a question.
Yeah, a question and a comment. I love the comment of being unapologetically yourself. I absolutely agree with that. My question is, we all have biases. They usually kick in the first few seconds, but I don't know how long they last. So what part of a decision-making process, a fit for a company is based off of bias? How often is that really a problem? And maybe the HR folks can respond.
Jill, what do you think about that?
I'm gonna have to jump off, but I have it because I have a noon. But I think if you have the like with the clients that I work with, I definitely make sure that there's assessments that are used so that everyone's equal on every level. You're asked the same questions. The assessment is, there's an assessment that's rated. Are there bias in there? Of course, there's going to be some bias, but we kind of take it away as much as we can because it's very targeted as far as what we're looking for in positions. So to your point, I don't know how much of it makes a difference. I will say that in this one particular client that I'm working with, we are looking to bring diversity, more diversity into the population. So that, they're going in with that mindset. So on one hand, it's almost like you have to reverse it, make sure you're not just choosing them for that reason, right? Because of the diversity. So we use assessments to make it as equitable as possible. And I don't need to be rude, but I do need to jump off. So,
okay, well, thank you, Jill. And thank you, everyone. We're out of time. Thank you so much for your participation. And we'll send the recording out. We'll send the links that might be helpful. We'll try to find Chris Hickey's suggestion from Google. And thank you all. I hope you have a great weekend. We're going to see you next week. We have another great speaker, and be safe and have fun.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
everyone.
Great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.